colleagues. I'm going to invite our panelists to introduce themselves. And Tiffany, would you like to get us started off with your introduction?
Sure. I'm Tiffany Lankus. I'm the Communications Director for EdTrust New York, and I am based in Rochester, New York.
Awesome. Thank you. And then Vilmaris?
Yeah, thanks, Kia, and hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Vilmaris Gonzalez, and I'm the Senior Manager of Engagement and Operations at the Education Trust in Tennessee, and I'm based out of Nashville, Tennessee, and I work closely with our students, and I'm excited to share more about that today in our conversation.
Thank you. Trey, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Trey Cunningham. I'm a member of the Education Trust of Tennessee's Student Voice Network, and I'm also a student at the illustrious Tennessee State University.
Yes, TSU. Sam, I also just noticed the picture of President Obama in the corner right behind you. I love that. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes. My name is Sam Radford, and I am the director of the CAO Better Schools, Better Neighborhood program. I'm a member of the New York Equity Coalition. Also the media past president for the Buffalo Public Schools District Parent Coordinating Council and the co-chair of We the Parents of Buffalo. So active parent leader for the past 30 years.
Thank you. So excited to have you with us today, too. So, y'all, this session is all about advocacy and engaging parents and students. And so we are going to get started. And Tiffany, would love for you to start us off talking a little bit about why authentic voice is so important in advocacy and how you all have included those voices in your work in New York.
Sure. It feels a little impossible to follow the beautiful video this morning with the students, but I think it also sets the stage to demonstrate what we're going to talk about today. And it's the power of elevating student and parent voices and their experience, and just kind of the emotion that that can elicit when we're thinking about how to move policy in our advocacy agenda. So when we think about advocacy in New York, we really are thinking about how we can develop a narrative around education equity that resonates across New York State. With stakeholders from the parents and the students that we want to activate to the policymakers who will ultimately be making the key decisions that affect what's happening in classrooms. So the way we approach it, as many of the other EdTrust offices, is with kind of two key components. One, reliable, hard-hitting data, and then coupling that with the lived experiences of students, parents, and educators, the people who are closest to and have really been most impacted by the inequities that persist in our school systems. And we're always just kind of thinking about how we can include those voices in our advocacy materials and also our kind of face-to-face advocacy with policymakers. So some of the ways we have done that is incorporating those narrative elements and stories into our reports and policy briefs. If you look at the work we've done around suspensions or access to higher level coursework, the reports lead with the stories of students and how they've been impacted by these lack of opportunities and inequities in their school systems. So that's a really way too to bring a policy brief that sometimes can feel a little wonky or may not resonate with a broad audience, and really kind of put a human face on these issues and bring them to life in a way that will help people both better understand them and also feel moved to act on them. Another way we do that is, aside from the policy briefs, we're always thinking about supplemental materials that we can use to complement our policy agenda and also push it out on multiple platforms. So sometimes that's a video like we saw this morning, a blog post, a social media post, or a full-out social media campaign. And not only do these different tools and platforms let us bring the authentic voices to the forefront of the movement around these issues, they're also tools we can use to do a steady drumbeat on our policy agenda so that we have fresh content that we're consistently rolling out to kind of let a campaign have legs and go a little bit longer. So we produce fresh content that appeals to a broad audience and tells the story of education equities in different ways on different platforms that will likely reach different people. One very specific example of something we've done in New York, which is one of my favorite campaigns, is every year for Black History Month, we do a campaign called My History, My Future. And we invite students from across New York State to submit reflections on what they want their future to look like. And then we do a very robust social media campaign throughout the month of February, really elevating their sentiments and their voices. The other nice thing that we have about that is we do it in partnership with our New York State Education Department, which isn't always a fan of some of the work that we're doing. But in this case, I think we share a joint interest in elevating student voice and also their experiences in the classroom. So it allows us to not only bring the voices of students to the forefront, but also develop partnerships with not only the state education department, but schools and districts across the state that we can then leverage, and we continue to engage in our advocacy after that. So I think kind of the takeaway from that is thinking about advocacy, not just kind of in the initial policy brief, but how can you kind of couple the tools and the platforms that are available to elevate the authentic voices of parents, students, and educators to really drive the policy actions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tiffany. And thank you, Liz, for, we had someone asked for a link in the chat. So thank you, Liz, for dropping that in there. And of course, before we're able to produce all of those incredible advocacy tools that Tiffany just talked about, social media and adding narrative into policy briefs, you really have to have a network of key stakeholders who you can turn to and learn from their stories kind of already developed. And I know that's some work that we've been doing in Tennessee. So Vimadis, could you talk a little bit about how Tennessee has developed those relationships and partnerships in our student voice work?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, welcome everyone. And for folks who just joined, and my name is Vilmaris Gonzalez, and I work at the Ed Trust Tennessee office. So for context, which I think is really important for kind of how we got to where we are today, the Education Trust Tennessee office is a state office of Ed Trust National, and we opened our virtual doors in January of 2020, right before the pandemic. I'm one of two other members that started the state office, and we had really big dreams, and we still do, and we're living into some of them, but obviously they've taken shape in different ways because of the pandemic. So we always knew that we wanted student voice to be integral to our work and our approach. We know that elevating student voices, building relationships with them, and having them really speak to the issues that they care about and the change that they wanted to see would be powerful, and it's just important. We knew we wanted to center that in our work. Obviously, the pandemic hit in March of 2020, as we all know, and that really shifted how we were going to go about doing this work. We had to shift everything to being virtual and really think through, how do we build authentic relationships in a virtual sphere and space? I'll be honest and say, when we got started, I was thinking, oh my gosh, like, how are we going to do this? This is going to be impossible. But I proved myself wrong. I feel like we all proved ourselves wrong. It has actually not been impossible. What we noticed was that there was this desire and this almost craving for students to feel connected, because the way that online learning happened, and it was so abruptly, so many students felt disconnected from their teachers, from their classmates. If you had a simple question, it's not like you could raise your hand or turn around and ask someone. You had to go through a whole process of emailing them, waiting for a response, setting up a call, right? It wasn't organic. It totally changed how we operated and how we engaged with one another. So building this online community has just been really powerful. And what we started was, we leaned on our closest partners. So if you're an organization that has really close partnerships with other orgs, really leaning and relying on them, getting the word out, having them nominate students, having them plug in students. And then I started with initial intakes, really interviewing students, and not so much interviewing. I called it an intake, because I wanted to really get a pulse of who they were, let them know who we were, and then figured out, was there alignment and was there interest for them to join us on somewhat of a vague and ambiguous journey, but really promising that they would be invested in and that we would build relationship. So I'm a really big believer, I would say, as a practitioner in this work, that true learning, change, magic, all the things that need to happen in order for movement work to occur, it's first established in building those relationships, right? It's for students to feel that they're in a trusted, safe space where they can learn, where they can be authentic, right? It doesn't happen overnight. It takes session after session of kind of peeling away those layers. And also, as the adults in the space, feeling like you can also share a part of yourself and who you are, and doing that in an authentic way, and really having that exchange. So that has happened really over the course of almost 2 years now, which is wild, because it'll be 2 years in January that we've been engaged in this work. And Trey, like he mentioned, and you'll hear more from him in a moment, is one of our very active and engaged students. So I know he'll tell you a little bit more about the process from his end. But we, from there, then formalized a a student voice network, recruiting league leaders to form an advisory. And that's still in the making of figuring out what are the issues that we want to elevate? What do students want to focus on? How do they want to engage in education policy and advocacy? And how do we center them? And then from there, I would say in tandem, Alexa Barajas Clark, who is our assistant director at the Education Trust Tennessee office, really built strong relationships with our media partners, one of them being Chalkbeat Tennessee. They have a bureau here in Memphis, and we have really strong connections and ties with them. And this idea sort of came to be because we're always checking in with them. We have a couple of reporters we're close with, and we pitched this idea of what would it be like if we recruited students to have a conversation with Secretary Miguel Cardona, who's the current Secretary of Education, having students really off the cuff engage him in authentic conversation about things that they were facing, especially as it relates to the pandemic. We pitched that idea. We decided to tag team. We reached out to the department and we made the ask. And, big love and kudos to Alexa, because she really, I know, behind the scenes orchestrated so many of the moving pieces and parts and communications between our different Ed Trust offices and also the department. So we decided too that it shouldn't just be a Tennessee student thing. It should be, how do we tap into Ed Trust Michigan, right? Ed Trust Midwest office. How do we partner with Tiffany and the students that they're engaged with, right? So we all came together. We put a series of trainings, comms trainings, really, again, at that foundation of building community, building relationships, knowing that students, if they had a series of sessions leading up to this big moment, that they could show up and be authentic and have the confidence that they would need to engage someone like the Secretary of Education. Because y'all, I wasn't on camera that day and I was like, oh my gosh, like this is happening and I'm a part of this. So I think I'll leave it actually there and let Trey just elaborate a bit more on just his experience. But I will just leave that at the core of so much of this work is relationship building that trust, and that lends itself to creating authentic and brave spaces where people want to share and elevate their story and their voices to enact change. But thank you so much. I'm happy to answer questions at the end, and I'll pass it off to you, Kia. Thank you.
That was so beautiful. I love hearing you. Your passion for the students is just so evident and so clear, not only in how you talk about them, but also in your work with them as well. And I think you do such an excellent job in investing in them, which does, I think, make the storytelling and the connecting a lot easier. I see that there are some members from Team Tennessee very active in the chat, so thanks to y'all for sharing those links. And if folks have questions, feel free to drop those in there throughout, and we'll make sure we have time at the end. But I'm now really excited to pass it off to Trey to talk about his experience with Ed Trust Tennessee Student Voice Work. So Trey, if you could just tell us a little bit about how you got involved in this work and how it's been important to you as a student.
Well, thank you so much. So even though I am pretty young, I'm only 18, I've been involved in the work of advocacy and policy and things like that for a long time throughout my childhood, and especially in my community. In my community, the NAACP was very active, and it played a big role into me starting into this field of the work. So, but the Education Trust really expanded that because, since joining, I've had several opportunities to grow, to meet new people, and to truly become an agent of change. Over these past 2 years, I have served in numerous facets of the Student Voice Network umbrella as a student member of the P12 Policy Council. There I've got an opportunity to understand where policy intersects with education, identifying key opportunities for students and advancing equity that go along with policy, research, and advocacy, and just truly learn how to be an asset to the cause. I've also been a policy researcher where I've analyzed education data, and I have made connections with that data. And one of the most rewarding experiences was to be, and this is most recent, is a league leader and an Empower Ed student. In this capacity, I've been able to really get into the work and be deeply committed as a student. It's allowed me to be a part of a group of leaders, especially student leaders and advocates who are committed to educational equity and justice, who want to elevate the education and social justice issues that society faces today, and to have access to those who make those decisions and those like policymakers and people like that. As Ms. Gomez mentioned, I had the opportunity to be a part of a group of students who interviewed Dr. Miguel Cardona, who is the current Secretary of Education. That was like the highlight of my career, I guess you could say, with the Education Trust. It was really, really rewarding, and it was invigorating to see somebody of his caliber and somebody just of, you know, that prominence to sit down with me as just a little old public school student, you know, and, you know, really take what I said to heart and listen to everything I had to say and, you know, actually answer them with, you know, answers that he would probably give someone at the White House. So it was really rewarding. And all in all, this experience has allowed me to become a much better advocate, a much better leader, and a person who's just committed to the work.
Yes, a person who's committed to the work. You are such an incredible leader, Trey, and like you've done so much already in your short 18 years, and so I'm really, really excited to see what the next few years hold for you, especially as you start your college journey too. But we're so happy to have you in our network and alongside us in this work. But thank you for sharing that, and I'm really excited to transition to our fourth panelist, who is our friend Sam. Sam, I know you've been really instrumental in working with New York and with our national office on similar efforts to engage parents and to elevate their voices. So could you talk to us a little bit about what that has looked like?
Yes, I'm happy to. I'm actually on the other end of the spectrum from Trey. You know what I'm saying? Trey just getting started. I've been doing this for quite some time. Actually, you know, 30 years ago, as a young Head Start parent, I got involved as an education advocate. But let me just say how impressed I am to see that the work that the Ed Trust offices all across this country are doing with engaging parents and students in terms of parent and student advocacy. And so the opportunity to be able to work with a family fellowship that happened in 2018. Like I said, I've been doing this a long time. One of the most impactful experiences I've ever had as a parent leader, and I've been a parent leader at every level, district, local, state, and national, is when we were part of the Ed Trust Family Fellowship in 2018. That family fellowship brought parents from local parents that also work together in state cohorts, also work together in a national cohort. Now, again, I've never seen anything like that, where you had, you know, you were being trained to organize around issues that are impacting you specifically in your local school district, but at the same time, understanding that it's really the state that's really driving what's going on at the local level, but really is the national that's really, you know, 5 years, you know, ahead in terms of what's driving what's going on at the local level, and getting trained in all of that at one time. I've never had an experience like that. It's probably the most significant and impactful experience I had as a education advocate. And then, you know, just working with that group of people, those relationships that you build with people from different parts of the country. And you found out, particularly in a lot of the large urban school districts, we are in different places, but we have really the similar and same experiences, and being able to get techniques and, you know, learn strategies on how to mobilize and organize and impact change at the local and state level, and ultimately even doing some things at a national level. So that was a really great experience, but is nothing compared to what's coming next. Because now in New York, we are going to be doing a parent advocacy policy lab. And so what we're going to be doing is taking parents from all across the state, the diverse group of parents from all across the state, and we're going to be mobilizing and organizing them around the American Rescue Plan Act funding. And we're going to train them to be able to understand how that funding is supposed to be used, and be able to monitor and evaluate the effectiveness of its use, and have some say so in how those resources are being used. And so they'll have the ability to hold people accountable. And just as an experienced parent leader, I don't even know if parents understand how significant it is to be able to have the backing of Ed Trust in that research, in that background information that you get. So when you go to these local school board meetings or the state education department, you really have a historical context, you have the data, and you're able to advocate in a way that you can bring about real and meaningful change. So we've been successful here in New York, and I'm excited about what's coming next. And so I'm looking forward to, the continued support of Ed Trust and the work that we're doing in parent advocacy.
Thank you so much, Sam. I feel like I could just listen to you talk all day too. But I love the piece that you said about the data and analysis and really being able to back up people's personal stories and experiences with that research. I think that's definitely Ed Trust lane. And I'm so excited for the Parent Policy Lab and to see what comes of that. I know lots of people, I know we're watching, and lots of other people across the country are watching to see how that goes too. Tiffany, did you have anything to add there? No. Well, y'all, we are actually that we've heard from all four of our panelists now. I think a really kind of encompassing view and from different perspectives on the importance of engaging stakeholders in our policy and advocacy work. And so for the rest of our time together, I think we have about 20 more minutes. First, we'd like to invite folks to drop any questions into the chat that you have for any of our panelists. So anything for Sam, Tiffany, Vimalius, or Trey about their experiences or the work that they talked about today. And then we would also love to hear from you how you think you could engage students or parents or other stakeholders in the work that you're doing. So feel free to drop that in the chat. Any ideas you have about increasing stakeholder engagement and any questions for our panelists. And I will check out, or any examples of things that you're already doing.
There was already a question, and I actually would love for Sam to weigh in, because I think he touched on this a little, but can go deeper. And Kia, as you mentioned, we all enjoy listening to Sam and his experience. So Sam, the question was how to support or train parents to actually testify, to speak personally about equity. Now, I know my background was as a reporter, so I've known Sam for years when he used to address the Buffalo School Board. But I know in his role with the New York Equity Coalition, he's also been in front of commissioners of education. As you can see behind him, he has also met with President Obama. So Sam might be able to reflect a little just on how he was set up for success in those and maybe what strategies have worked more effectively.
Yeah, let me just say the most important strategy was, let me put it in this context. My grandmother said, if two people are exactly alike, one of them ain't necessary. What was the point she was making? You know what I'm saying? She was making the point that each of us have our own authentic voice. And so one of the most important ways that we were set up to be successful is making sure your experience matters. What you're going through and speaking out of your own authentic voice is what matters the most. So you can't be wrong. So you don't have to feel no two ways about going to testify about what you're experiencing and making sure the record is part of the public record and using now those stories are the things that really influence the change. So sometimes people want to, go and testify and they just want to read what, the data or read what they've been told to say. And that's part of it, if it hitting certain talking points, but you really want to come out of your own authentic experience, out of your own authentic voice, and talk about your lived experiences and let people respond and react to that.
There's actually, Kia, I don't know if you saw it yet, but there's the same question for Trey, I think.
Thank you, Sam. And then I don't know if Vimalius, you wanted to take that one, or Trey, if you wanted to talk about things that we've done or that you've done with Ed Trust or other orgs to help you feel more prepared to tell your story, to share your story.
Yeah, I'm happy to set it up, Trey. And then if you want to add, based on your experience too, I think that'd be helpful. So I would say that there's not necessarily a one size fits all. I think it really just depends on what issue it is that we are tackling and figuring out so if it's other advocates, right? Other adults figuring out what organizations or point of contacts should be looped in certain conversations, meetings. If we're creating a video to really promote, right now we are in the process of making a video for a report. So figuring out, well, who are those people across the state that need to be involved and whose stories really align with what it is that we're trying to transmit our message, right? So I think it's not a one size fits all. We have on our website too a button that says share your story. So there's also a way for folks to submit online stories. I think in the coming months, I envision us really pushing that out a bit more so that we have a collection of stories and people sharing them as it relates to education issues that they care about, education justice issues, that they care about, or that they want to elevate and speak to, right? Whether it's personal or they just feel really passionate about it. And then I would say on the student front, again, it's not a one size fits all. I really try to connect and coach and mentor one-on-one all of our students and really build that rapport and relationship with them. So as we get opportunities, whether it's, hey, for example, a couple months ago, a student wrote an op-ed for the Tennessean because so much here in the South, especially in Tennessee, has been hyper-focused on mask mandates, even though, yes, mask mandates are very, very important. But at the same time, the state legislature is calling special sessions and passing anti-CRT legislation, right? All in the same breath. So we also know that some of these other conversations are just massive distractions from real critical issues that they don't want us to pay attention to or be engaged in, right? So we had a student write an op-ed from their perspective about what they feel like folks in power need to be paying attention to, and from a student perspective. Recently, we also had one of our students, Salwa, who's going to speak actually during boot camp this time during the CRT plenary. A first person piece on really for Chalkbeat, they have this open forum, right? So we envision a lot of our students being involved in this effort throughout this year and them really picking whatever issue it is they want to talk about. But she's a freshman at Vanderbilt University, majoring in history. She is Muslim and Mexican and Lebanese and American, right? All at the same time. She carries all of these different identities, and she's experienced a lot of Islamophobia and also a lot of erasure of her own people and culture in textbooks, right? So from her perspective, that's what she really wanted to elevate and tying that to anti-CRT legislation. So I think it's also just figuring out, and it goes back to that relationship piece. It goes back to knowing the people that you walk alongside, right? That you want to invest in and develop, figuring out what it is that they care about so that you can also plug them into the right opportunities where they can elevate and use their voice. Trey, what would you add from your perspective and how I've engaged you or how other folks in the Tennessee office have engaged you to plug in? What would you say?
And excuse me, any noise, Tisha is doing a little maintenance right now, but Ms. Vilmaris, she always kind of engages me and plugs me into the right things that I think she kind of understands, because as we built a rapport with each other, she kind of knows what will be beneficial to me. And I think a lot of the people at the Ed Trust kind of know, oh, well, he has an interest in education equity or resource equity. So they try to plug me into opportunities that will be beneficial to me in specific things like that. So I feel like, the Education Trust kind of helps me build on my knowledge in certain areas and things of that nature.
Awesome. Thank you both. There was another question from Valerie in the chat, and they asked, they said, I'm interested in the logistics of soliciting stories and participants for advocacy work, like giving a testimony, and how do you compensate people for their time? I think that's an interesting and an important question.
I can hop on that, and then if Tennessee has any thoughts on this too. So I think kind of the range of involvement, there is a range. Someone else put a question about focus groups being underutilized. We do a lot of focus groups, which along with kind of gathering those experiences and stories, we very much consider part of the research. There's kind of a spectrum, and I think it kind of ranges on how much time someone puts into something. So for example, when we do focus groups, we do stipends to participants, usually a gift card, somewhere between $50 and $100, again, depending on the time commitment. When we do the fellowship and the parent advocacy lab, there is a stipend involved with that. So the parents that do that, I think when we've done it before, it's usually around $1,000. So we kind of look at it, there's a range. And then we also have, people like Sam who are part of our equity coalition, which is very much a number of different organizations from across the state. Some people are doing it as part of their regular work roles. Some people are doing it more on a volunteer basis. So in some instances where I think there's a bigger time commitment, we do compensate in that way. But then in other instances, it's more kind of driven by pure interest of people wanting to get involved and wanting to tell their stories. So we don't necessarily compensate in those instances. I don't know if Tennessee has any thoughts on stipends or focus groups.
Yeah, so we also stipend our students, especially. I feel like with a lot of our adult advocates, like we've had an institute where folks applied and they were invited into this space. And we think in certain scenarios, like the knowledge itself, the community building, and then what is a product of that is just as powerful. And especially for some folks who are doing it and representing their organization. But especially, I'll speak more to the student piece. I know that as a student, I had to work throughout college and I had 2 jobs at one point and just to help support some of my own needs, right? And I know that's the case for our students, and some of them have even more dire circumstances. So I know that when they're investing so many hours per month, that is also likely taking away time from them studying, taking time away from them maybe working that part-time job on a Thursday afternoon, right? And losing some hours. And then we also know that when folks are incentivized, they're also a little more motivated, right? They're going to be a little more engaged. They're going to show up because they also know not only am I getting all of these benefits and perks and I'm being invested in and I'm going to these trainings and I'm being engaged and I'm being guided and pushed, right, to really expand my knowledge and my breadth. I also know that at the end of the semester, I'm going to get a $500 stipend that I can use to pay myself back maybe for books that I put on my credit card, right? Or to start paying back maybe something else that they owe. Like, I think a lot of us, I don't want to make assumptions, right? I know that all of my education was funded through a lot of loans and then a lot of, credit card use and all, right? Plugging in here and there and borrowing money. So we know that that's just the reality of a lot of our students. And we don't only work with college students, but I would say it is the majority. We have some high school students as well. And it's still just a fun perk to know that at the end of each semester, I'm going to be compensated for the time and energy and effort that I'm putting in. But I will say, like, if you're able to do that, if you're at an organization that has the resources to do that, because I also know it's a privilege to be able to do that. Not everyone has the funding right now to maybe do that. But if you do, I think it's also just being really upfront and transparent in the beginning of like, this is the commitment. This is what you're signing up for. This is what you get as a reward if you remain committed. But unfortunately, if you don't, you also won't get this, right? So I don't think it also has to just be assumed. I think there has to be intentionality of how you want to stipend students. And then in other ways, we also will send gift cards too, if it's kind of like a one-off thing. Or I hosted some focus groups before we started the network, and that was a way that we also engaged and incentivized and thanked folks for their time and for offering their expertise, was by sending thank you cards and gift cards to them. So I think there's a variety of ways you can go about it, but definitely think giving stipends to students, is just really important, especially in this day and age. Like, it's expensive. Like, life is just expensive.
Something else I'll also add beyond kind of the stipend and the compensation that I do think is really important, and I think we prioritize at EdTrust, is if you are asking parents and students to participate in something that is going to generate an expense for them, you also need to be thinking about covering that. So we've done focus groups. We did one in Buffalo a few years ago and gave students the option, are you coming on the train? Are you coming in your car? Can we reimburse you for parking? When we did the fellowship that Sam talked about, there was some travel involved both in the state and to Washington, D.C. So as an organization, the rooms are paid for in advance. The meals are all covered. We never assume a reimbursement process. Same thing we present when in normal in-person times, we usually present at the Black and Puerto Rican Caucus. And same thing for all of our speakers, is we really prioritize making sure that no one will have to put any money on the table to participate in any of these opportunities. So I just think that is something at EdTrust we've prioritized over the years. And if you're an organization thinking about that, along with just the compensation for time, kind of removing that barrier from parents and students so that they can participate is also really important. We have a bunch of questions, so I am going to let Kia pick which one is next.
There are a lot of questions. We have about 9 more minutes left, so we're going to try to get through as many of these as possible. I think this is a quick one, Vimani. It's about how you're connecting with students or getting access to students. And then Tiffany, if there is an angle there about the parents y'all are connected with, would love to hear that too.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll also just echo or just like second what Tiffany said. That's definitely an approach that was used in my former job. And it's something that when we're all able to safely travel again, we know that we have big dreams and ideas of taking our advocates and our students with us to boot camps in person or other opportunities, and knowing that removing that barrier is very key and critical. And as far as access and engagement with students, like I mentioned in the very beginning, we've really relied on our closest partners when we were getting the office off the ground of being like, hey, these are our ideas to engage students and to formalize a program. Do you have any student leaders in your network or in mind that would be a good fit, that would be willing to kind of join us on this journey of elevating student voice? So I did those initial intakes really just over Zoom, and I also let them know via email, because that partner org would connect me via email. I would let them know hey, if a parent or guardian needs to be present, I'm more than happy to also meet your parents. And some of the parents, especially for the high school students, were on the call initially, right? So they could see me, they could see that I was a real human, that I had a real job, that this was legitimate, right? So I think also making that known. And then as far as once students agreed, we also had a form for them to sign, laying out those responsibilities. Parents or guardians signing that too. And then as far as remaining connected to them, or I also add that then from there, we grew into other opportunities where students would apply directly. And that's kind of where we are now. In the beginning, we needed that initial support to really recruit students into our work. But now we've put an application out and there's interest, there's buzz. People kind of know who we are now. We're gaining an identity in the state. And then as far as staying connected, GroupMe is just a great tool. It's just a text messaging app where everyone can stay connected, but not everyone needs each other's numbers. I have everyone's number, and sometimes students will directly message me. I also know, I'll just go ahead and name that sometimes people don't view that as the best practice, and I totally understand that, but sometimes just as easier. So sometimes Trey and I were texting before this, right? Of just checking in. So, I'm okay with that. I think that's a personal preference, but really leaning on GroupMe for one-on-ones, and also just, group sort of updates, because email sometimes just not the best way. I've noticed I can send 3 follow-up emails and hear nothing. And then I send a direct text and I get a response instantly, right? So I think also just kind of knowing what students respond to what. But yeah, as far as access, it's partners, and then now just putting things out there and creating those opportunities.
Yeah, I would just add, I think the key is really to kind of have the network and have those relationships for when you're going to need them, when you need to kind of trigger that movement. Vilmara's talked about the great work they're doing in Tennessee and kind of the infrastructure that they have. One of the things we do in New York is we also have an equity partnership program. And I'm really excited that 2 of the groups are student groups. So, it's a program that the organizations get a micro grant to kind of fuel their local level advocacy. And pretty early on in EdTrust New York's history, we started welcoming in the student groups. And it's been a really powerful thing, not only kind of to empower them and give them the resources that Sam talked about, that they can do advocacy to the school boards in the districts where they attend school. But I also see it as a great kind of technique for grooming kind of the future advocacy leaders, because they're getting a little taste of it when they're in high school. And then like Trey, and someone who carries on when they go on throughout their life. But I would say, just in terms of, it's very difficult if you decide we're going to release a policy brief tomorrow or next week on suspensions to have to go out and find the students. But if you're already engaging them in the issues and having those conversations, not only are you able to tap into those stories a little bit easier, you've also been taking the time for the students to really understand and reflect on the issues. And I think that's also really important too, to make sure you're soliciting. Someone had asked a question, I think, about kind of the authentic story. And I think sometimes that takes time, and that takes relationships, and that takes a really thorough understanding of a topic, as opposed to just kind of, we need your story or we need your voice for this policy report. So it's an ongoing process, and it does kind of require very thoughtful infrastructure. And of course, those really strong relationships that you develop over time.
Thank you both. I'm going to jump to the next question. This one is about any tips for overcoming harmful counter narratives when the other side seems to have so many more resources, as in time or money? And then they gave an example for their question. But Sam, would you like to start us off for this one?
Yeah, let me say one of the things that has been really helpful when we're working with Ed Trust is we have a New York Equity Coalition, and it's also a Buffalo Equity Coalition. So one of the important strategies is having a coalition of people that you work with. And our coalition includes people from the business community, people from the religious community, people from the not-for-profit community. I mean, a broad coalition of people who, they're not necessarily impacted on the issue the same way as a person that's directly impacted, but they are, they relate to what you're going through, and they can come and be supporters of your issue, especially if you're in a coalition relationship and y'all talking about the things in advance. And so we've been really, really fortunate. And when we've had issues, when we come up against, not to necessarily identify any particular group, but let's say the union and us are not on the same page on a particular issue, they are a much stronger body that has a local, state, and a national, connection. So to be able to put out, get our word through, sometimes we need a broader voice than just the parent voice. So if we're able to get the business community in the conversation with us, we're able to get the religious community. And so we put together other allies to make sure our voice is heard, as a part of a collective network of people who support the issue.
I would just add on to that, and I think Sam would agree, data. Facts don't lie, and especially the ones coming from Ed Trust. And Sam can go into a school board meeting and talk about how many Black kids are getting suspended in Buffalo, but when he has the data and the one pager that actually says this is the highest percentage of Black kids getting suspended of all of the large urban districts in New York State, that gives him a lot more juice to kind of counter the naysayers when they come back. So, again, I think that's the power of the data coupled with the real stories is a good starting point. And to Sam's point, having like the chorus of voices from different sectors all kind of rowing together in the same way.
And saying how they are impacted, because that impacts the community. The suspension don't just impact the students, families, the community, and everybody talking about the larger impact, and the data. I mean, you can't put a price on when you are right on in terms of the data. There's no overcoming that. Facts speak for themselves.
Yes, they do. And yes, they should speak for themselves. Y'all, we have 1 minute left. I don't know if anyone has any closing remarks, any of our panelists? No? Trey, anything from you? Any last? No? Okay, thank you all so much for being here with us today. I know that Tiffany and Vimati's both dropped their emails in the chat. If you have, I know there are questions that we didn't get to. If you have other questions and you would like to follow up with them, I know they're both very receptive, but this has been wonderful. Thank you so much, Trey and Sam, for being here and providing your really important perspective in this work. And we'll be in touch. We'll be in touch soon. Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of boot camp.
All right.
Bye, y'all. Thank you.